Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Sushil Patel. On behalf of organizing committee of DTechCon, I welcome you all on the second day of the Sunday beautiful morning. After the first successful day of DTechCon, we are now heading towards the second day. The start was already done in the hall A by some international speakers, and now we have the very beautiful panel discussion by the VCs of the startups. So let's begin with the introduction of the moderator. Can I have the slides of the moderator? Yes. So the moderator for our first panel discussion of the VCs, we have the Mr. Gautam Chopra. We all know him by the name of Bito. He's a co-founder and the CEO of Bito, a digital health platform for the chronic condition management. He is an alumnus of the Indian School of Business, Hyderabad, and holds a Bachelor of Technology degree in the Electronic and Communication from the University of Leicester, UK. So I hope that this session will be very much helpful for the doctors specifically, as the VCs are discussing something on the startups. So over to you, Mr. Gautam Chopra.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sushil. And I must say, Bito is much of a catchier name than Gautam is. So thank you for that.
Yes.
But thank you once again. And it gives me immense pleasure to be hosting this very exciting panel discussion with perhaps the top venture capitalists in India, who are in fact playing a very, very crucial role in supporting us startups come up with digital first models that are going to make healthcare in India far more equitable and accessible for everyone. And you all know India unfortunately has more than 80 million people living with diabetes, and some say these are in fact conservative figures. And what is even more starking is the fact that 80% of these individuals are actually, they have uncontrolled diabetes. So we are really confronted with this massive problem. And in fact, I was just yesterday reading an original article by none other than Dr. Shashank Joshi, who showed how limited consultation time in our country is correlated to poor diabetes management. So, the larger question is, with such a massive population and such few doctors, how do we solve for this? And the only answer that comes to mind, you can keep repeat playing it, is going to be technology. And hence, before I begin, I wanted to start off by congratulating, first of all you doctors in the audience who have started to embrace technology. And the very fact that you've created this fantastic platform of DTechCon, it shows how serious you are to tackle this head on. Next, I also want to congratulate all the startups in the audience and, apart from that too, who are working in this space. And trust me, it's not easy, right, to be able to crack this. And finally, the amazing venture capitalists who are working and supporting us tirelessly, as innovators and disruptors to bring to life models that are really going to revolutionize healthcare in our country. So without much ado, let me dive right into the session with a fantastic set of people I have as fellow panelists, and who are not only VCs, but bring strong and deep-rooted links in one way or the other to healthcare and definitely know a thing or two about how to solve this problem. So ladies and gentlemen, today we have with us a stellar group of people. We have Dr. Pankaj Jethwani from W Health VC. Let me just quickly, Dr. Vikram Popli from Leapfrog. We have Tejasvi from Lightrock, and we have Shwetank Verma from Leo Capital. And, let me begin by asking all of my panelists to please introduce themselves and give us a flavor of their backgrounds and tell us a bit more about their firms. So maybe let's start with you, Tejasvi, and then we can move to the rest of the panelists.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Gautam. I'm delighted to be here. Let me just do a quick 2-minute of the fund I work for. It's called Lightrock. Lightrock is an impact investing fund that's part of a global platform. So we have presence across Latin America, Europe, Africa, and India. And we focus across sectors of impact, but healthcare is clearly a big focus area for us. We are growth stage investors, and what that generally means is that we look for companies who not only have a product, but have demonstrated traction with customers and can show that they've actually they have something that works, and then we provide financing that helps them scale up to many more people. I think some of our investments in India include PharmEasy, MediBuddy, Acnomed, which is also a supply chain company, Kaveri Hospitals, and several more. I lead healthcare investments for Lightrock, and my background is I've basically spent my entire career in healthcare, starting as a strategy consultant, both with Bain, both in India as well as out of the US, and working at Medanta for a couple of years as part of the leadership team there, which was a very interesting experience before coming to Lightrock.
Super. Thank you so much for that, Tejasvi. Next, maybe we can move on to Vikram, Dr. Vikram. Vikram, you're on mute.
Sorry, I said I'm hearing that doctor after a very long time.
I'm overemphasizing on that, Dr. Vikram.
Yeah. Just as a disclosure, Gautam and I were batchmates at ISB. So that's the first time I'm actually hearing doctor from Gautam's mouth. So yes, Dr. Vikram Popli, did my MBBS from Maulana Azad Medical College, and then my MS in orthopedics from Safdarjung. I practiced for a while before joining Gautam for an MBA program at ISB Hyderabad. I've been in the investment space for almost 10 years now, earlier as part of another healthcare-focused fund, where I was part of transactions across hospitals, pharmacy, distribution, diagnostics, e-pharmacy. So I've seen quite a few sectors within the healthcare space in India. Currently, I'm representing Leapfrog. We are one of the pioneering investors in the impact space, one of the global leaders in the impact investment space as well. We typically do tech-led growth equity investments. So just as Tejasvi mentioned, we are more growth equity focused, where companies have already demonstrated scale and a product market fit. Basically two sectors, financial services and healthcare, and primarily addressing the emerging consumers of the world with best-in-class intentionality and reporting on impact metrics. So that's a brief. In terms of our portfolio right now here in India, we have Healthify.me. We recently led an investment in Redcliffe Diagnostics, which was announced just the day before yesterday. We have Ascent Meditech, which manufactures orthopedic soft goods under the brand name Flamingo, and MedGenome, one of the leaders in the genomic space in the country. Thanks.
Thank you, Vikram. So before we move to another doctor, we'll maybe hear from a non-doctor. So Shwetank, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Gautam. Great to be here. So hi, everyone. I'm Shwetank Verma. I'm the co-founder of Leo Capital. We are an early stage tech venture capital fund investing in companies that have just formed typically. So that means that, there is a founding team. There's typically an MVP, a minimum viable product. So it is a little bit more than a PowerPoint, but not as much proof point as you have when you start pitching to Lightrocks and Leapfrogs of the world. So that means we invest smaller amounts as well. So our typical investment is about, say, $1 million to $2 million US. And we help the company grow and find distribution channels, find the right kind of, the kind of people you need to hire in your team to grow and to sort of become big enough when Lightrock, Leapfrog, and all the growth investors of the world get excited and can take a look at you. We are cross-sector, but of course, healthcare is very dear and near to my heart. In our portfolio, we have invested in Beto, Way Forward, and a couple of others. My own background, I'm a chartered accountant by training, but I fell in love with healthcare very early as I was on the audit of the NHS in the UK. So came back to India in 2008, tried to replicate the private practitioner model, the GP model in India through a chain of primary care clinics, where we set up about 160 odd clinics in India, across South India, Hyderabad, Vijayawada, Visakhapatnam, etc. Great learning, great experience, and sort of parlayed that into my current investing journey, and happy to sort of try and bridge these worlds here between healthcare, technology, and of course, investing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shwetank. Dr. Pankaj? Pankaj hasn't heard me call him doctor either in a while.
Thanks, Gautam. Everyone, really great to be here. I'm Pankaj Jethwani, one of the co-founders of W Health Ventures. My background is a physician by training, practiced for a few years in Mumbai, and just like Dr. Vikram, and then moved over to management consulting, just like Tejasvi. So I was with the Boston Consulting Group for a few years, working at the intersection of their public sector practice and the healthcare work that we were doing. And then, really fell in love with the early stage, moved countries, moved from India to the US, fell in love with the early stage digital health activity that was going on in the US at that point. And prior to that was a decade of false promises by digital health companies where, a lot of money was being invested, but there was no real traction. Around that time, we were seeing real revenue being realized, real patients being impacted. So decided to jump, ship into early stage venture. Was part of a few companies. Most recently with a company called Iora Health that we scale nationally here in the US. And then, started W Health Ventures a few years ago to invest at the intersection of technology and care delivery. Really, the thesis being that technology has just started playing a role in transforming how care is delivered. And the next 5 to 10 years will look very different in how technology can completely disrupt and support physicians and patients in delivering fantastic outcomes that we don't probably see today. We at the fund at W Health Ventures, we invest exclusively in digital health. We're investing in sectors like diabetes and cardiometabolic disease. We've made investments in oncology, in primary care, in musculoskeletal disease, etc. And we invest in the US and India exclusively to geography focus. We love intersection between the two spaces as well. And yeah, we invest, in the US, we invest at seed. In India, we invest at Series A and pre-Series B. So maybe just after Shwetank and maybe just before Tejasvi and Vikram. And really excited to, be a part of the emerging and exploding innovation ecosystem that is happening in healthcare in India. And really excited here to, use the power of technology and help transform care delivery in the next, 5 or 10 years. So.
Thank you, Pankaj. And hearing all of you, I don't think I could have asked for a better panel to be discussing this very crucial topic today. But just to warm things up and get the audience going, and as we know, there are doctors as well as entrepreneurs, and I strongly believe that every doctor is also an entrepreneur, running their own practices and trying to equip themselves with the right tech and non-tech resources to deliver the best ROI for their own practice as well. So, and many of them, as I think Dr. Sushil and Dr. Amit also, pointed out before, might be also looking to, now start out on their own and come up with great ideas that would perhaps disrupt the market. So let's begin with, a couple of questions which I would like each of you to give your perspectives on, which I think will be hugely relevant for the audience comprising the doctors and the startups. So the first question which I would like to pose all of you would be, when you're evaluating startups, and maybe here, Shwetank, we can start with you and go up the sort of value chain for everyone to really understand. What are the top 2 things that you look for when evaluating, especially a healthcare startup? So let's begin with you, Shwetank. We can move to Pankaj and then Tejasvi and Vikram.
Great, thanks, Gautam. So the $1 million question: what gets us to write a check? I wish there was a simple algorithm that could just say this is it. But the number one question in our minds when we look at a company is, can this be big enough? So you have to understand that in a venture capital world, the number one thing is to back and build large businesses. Large businesses mean companies, that it's a horribly abused term, but our unicorn, decacorns can become big enough. And the right way to think about it is that they solve a problem that affects a large number of people or a large number of businesses. So that's the number one question. The technical term for this is called TAM analysis, total addressable market. And what you're trying to do is understand just how many people face this problem and how much are they willing to pay for it. Whether the people are individuals or businesses like hospitals, etc. It doesn't matter. What's the unit which faces the problem and what are they willing to pay to solve that problem? And you multiply the two, and that number needs to be large. It needs to be, say, in dollar terms, more than say $2-3 billion. So that means there is a large problem that you are trying to solve, and it's worth really spending time and effort doing this. Because whenever you start a company, you're looking at 5 to 10 years. It's a significant amount of time that you're going to give to it. So it needs to be large enough from a venture capital perspective. This is not to say that smaller companies are not worth doing. They are worth doing, but they're just not venture fundable. And you will hear that a few times when you talk to venture capitalists. This is not venture fundable. And what that means is it's great, but whatever its profile, its growth profile, its margin profile, its the size overall, that how big it can become, is not something that can be funded by venture capital. So classic example perhaps is like one single hospital. You can't fund a single hospital by venture because it'll never be that big, but you can obviously make very profitable and exceptional hospitals. The other thing that we look at is the founder market fit. So this is the team complete? So you typically require both clinical knowledge and business knowledge to be able to really crack healthcare. So for us, it's important that the founding team is complete and brings these complementary skill sets together. And a related part to that is the real understanding. It's again, sort of the term is, what's the core insight, or what's the unique insight that you have in the market that allows you to create a differentiation from whatever. So every problem that exists is being solved in some way. So what is your unique insight that is allowing you to create a better, faster, cheaper solution that allow you to reach out to the customers and help them start onboarding and using your service? Because the biggest force against you is inertia. And that's what, you have to understand how you're going to overcome that and move forward. So those are some of the things we think about at a very high level before, of course, going deeper and trying to see whether we can work with you. So the final piece, of course, is that early stage investors is a long marriage. It's a 5-year, 6-year marriage with the entrepreneurs. And there has to be an ability to work together both sides. And I think that's something we spend time on, helping even the entrepreneurs. And I urge all entrepreneurs here who are at the early stage, don't take the first check that comes to you. This person is going to be with you for a very long time. So make sure you can really work with them and you enjoy working with them. Otherwise, it'll become painful.
Those words of wisdom. Thank you, Shwetank. Of course, there were all of you in the audience, and especially those who are doctors, may not be very well familiar with some of the terminology, etc., that we use as startups. And of course, I've learned over a period of time as well, from VCs who we work with. But absolutely, I think that that initial sense of trust, of partnership between a startup as well as a early stage investor is extremely crucial, because for example, with Leo, we've been, almost like a husband and wife for the last 4 or 5 years. And it really requires you to be able to identify the true partner, the right partner who you can live this journey and build it on with them. So, but just to summarize for those in the audience, I think large, Shwetank, correct me if I'm wrong, a large target addressable market. So TAM, which is called target addressable market, a solid team, which the investors must believe will be able to crack this problem. And finally, what we refer to as moat, or rather something which is relatively unique in this idea or concept that will help the company win in this market. So I think those are great points. Thank you, Shwetank. Next, the same question to you, Pankaj. What do you look at as companies move from this very seed, or beyond the PowerPoint, of course, but to a little more mature stage?
Yeah, no, I don't like following Shwetank. He always makes the most relevant points. So definitely can't emphasize the importance of TAM, especially in a country like India, where most healthcare decision or healthcare purchasing happens out of pocket. It becomes very important to understand the depth of the market, really, in the disease areas you can actually back, especially in digital businesses. I think in addition to that, we almost look at investing in healthcare in India as investing in healthcare company, as well as investing in the consumer company at the same time. So metrics that are important for healthcare companies, and then metrics that are also important for the consumer companies that have to be validated. I think on the healthcare front, it's a really exciting time to be obsessed with patient experience and patient outcomes. So we've seen companies, some companies get to tremendous amount of scale in the country. And invariably, those companies tend to be obsessed with patient experience. And that can be measured by things like, are your patients referring other patients? Are your patients staying on, like, how good is engagement? Are they engaging with you 4, 5, 6 times a day? How is the engagement over time? And then more importantly, are they retaining on the platform for a long period of time? So what is retention? Our average company in India, retention we would see in the 2 to 3 month range. It's not exciting because that is not creating long-term value for the patient and for the company. So you look at these 3 metrics. Obviously, this is not true for every business. For an acute care business, this will not be relevant, but for most chronic conditions, this would be. And then what that results in, hopefully we expect, is disproportionately significant improvement in clinical outcomes. If it's diabetes, are we seeing a sustained reduction in HbA1c? Is this, because, it should really matter at the end of the day. So I think patient outcomes around retention, engagement, all that, and then will it really lead to clinical improvement is something we really care about. And the second is on the consumer metrics. We in India, we have the opportunity now to really build technology companies that can provide access where, there hasn't been access before, right? So I think we look at consumer metrics, really, internally we have a term called growth proof points. We look for companies who have a good hold of how to acquire patients profitably. We look for companies who are tracking unit economics at the early days itself. A lot of companies and a lot of founders you meet say that, okay, unit economics is something that we'll figure out in year 3, year 4, year 5. It's difficult to make that change, right? It takes a lot of effort to drive unit. So we like, companies that are very disciplined about growing profitably and startups invariably will continue to consume cash to grow, and that's perfectly, that's why early stage investors exist per se, but focus on core unit economics, focus on acquiring patients at scale. The metric that we track pretty closely is lifetime value of the patient and the cost of acquiring the patient. So those are some basic metrics we care about. So obsession with the patient, and then really strong business principles, fundamental principles right from the get-go are things we care about.
Great. No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Pankaj. I think it's usually relevant for the audience here to understand what are the kind of metrics, because as entrepreneurs, as startups, we may not all the time appreciate how you evaluate, companies, but it gives a very good insight into, what is most important for you guys when you're actually looking at startups to invest in. So thank you for that. Moving on, perhaps to you, Tejasvi, that now I would imagine when a company's gone through the stage of Shwetank as well as Pankaj, of course these are companies who have proven somewhat some of the things that both Shwetank and Pankaj have spoken about. So what are the next things that you look at, when making investment decisions?
Yeah, so I think most of the companies, by the time they come to us, have in general seen some amount of traction. So they have a set of paying customers, they have a certain amount of revenue, they have a vision that they can build, as Shwetank said, a really large scale business out of this. I think our lens, in addition to, I think Pankaj made the very important point that we always start from clinical outcomes, right? So but we start overlaying all of this while saying, are you set up for really disruptive large-scale growth? Because there's a difference between I have a product that it can sell versus actually saying, now I have a machine that is able to take this and grow 1000x from this point, right? So while looking at clinical outcomes, do you have the systems and processes to actually make sure that this is not something that's going to break as you get larger? Exactly the same question on, do patients think you have a good product? Because there's one aspect of actually have a solid clinical product. Second aspect of, do my patients think I have a solid clinical product? This sadly is not always the same. And then the third around all of the points on commerciality, right? So you figured out that there are certain sales channels that work for you. There are certain things that help you reach your customer and get traction and engagement and retention. Are you able to scale all of this? Do you have the systems? Do you have the team and the capability to do it? And the most important question is, have you spent too much money getting to this point? And does it look like you're going to continue spending too much money? Because capital efficiency in terms of just, as Pankaj said, running a lean business to make sure that you're able to build something without burning. We all read the news about startups burning, large amounts of money. That's not necessarily what we think is the right thing, especially for healthcare, right? So I think those are definitely some of the areas that we look at.
Great, thank you, Tejasvi, for that. And as I've heard all three of you, it appears, especially healthcare, when we're looking at it from your perspective, I don't think you can draw analogies to, perhaps commerce startups, quick commerce, and things like that. And of course, it has, different mechanics of being able to grow relatively sustainably. It might take longer than some of the, other domains or industries might require. So, with that, Vikram, to you, from the perspective of when you're looking at, companies grow from where they are today, many folds in the future, where having set that engine, what are the key things that you would look at also from, given the fact that both, of course, at Leapfrog as well as Lightrock, impact is an important criteria. But how do you balance that between, commercial or financial returns and the impact that that these companies are able to create?
Yeah. So as you know, Gautam, the motto of my organization is profit with purpose. So we look at both profit as well as purpose. While evaluating an opportunity, I think, as my previous panelists mentioned, a lot of the metrics in terms of PAM, unit economics have already been taken care of in some way by these series of rounds they've already raised. Now, coming to us, the two critical factors for us, obviously, are the customer centricity of the business and the alignment of the team to our impact thesis. Now, in terms of the customer centricity itself, we typically like businesses which are focused more on chronic diseases. There's a misconception that acute illnesses are the major burden among the emerging consumers. Given lifestyles and diet, it's actually more difficult for an emerging consumer to be affording a nutritious diet while managing his day-to-day activities. So we are more focused on companies which are tackling chronic illnesses like diabetes. We like companies which provide early diagnosis or prevention of such diseases. We like companies which bring care closer to the customer. And typically we like asset-light models, which allow our funding to be spread across multiple customers at minimal incremental costs. In terms of the other part, which is the alignment of the team to our impact thesis, that is paramount for us. And there's usually not a conflict between the two. If you see the market right now, there's a large underserved market in tier 2, tier 3 cities, which requires good quality healthcare. And the current models have so far not been possible to access that market itself. So that's the opportunity set there for us to make good profits along with driving purpose throughout the healthcare industry.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Vikram. And picking up on that note, is my next question to all of you, and perhaps to continue this thought process, Vikram, I'll pose that to you first. You've seen, must be seeing, all of you, in fact, in this forum, hundreds or thousands of concepts, ideas at different stages of maturity. But India, Bharat, is a very different animal. I mean, when you look at elsewhere in the world, West, etc., it's not very easy to replicate what's happening there, especially in healthcare, given our system is very different. So what do you think, Vikram, and we'll begin with you. Of course, I would love to get each of your perspectives. What is it going to take to crack the Bharat story as far as, this huge, everybody talks about this huge TAM. There are lots of gaps. Everything literally is fractured at this point in time. Poor doctor-patient ratio, etc., etc. But what are the kinds of business models that you see that can, with given the themes of profitability, underlying unit economics being solid, which will be able to scale, especially in tier 2 cities and beyond?
Sure. And I think we already covered the answer partly in our previous discussion. So the models have to be technology led. There is no other way to be able to reach the kind of market which is available there. And we also take Bharat a bit for granted. So we assume that the customer there is not as tech enabled, is not as tech savvy. I would want to narrate a story from one of my recent investments where I was doing a customer interview. The customer in this case was a guard in a tier 3 city in a hotel. And he came across the ad of the company on Facebook and was able to call the number, was able to book an appointment. So sitting here in metros, we assume that it's only the millennials or the boomers who are using these products, but there's a large segment of Bharat which is currently using these products. From the data which I've seen across multiple health tech companies, including yours, my portfolio companies, Healthify Me, Redcliffe, or the online pharmacies I've seen before, most of the demand is actually coming from tier 2, tier 3 cities. Between 60 to 70% of all health tech businesses right now are deriving the value from tier 2, tier 3 cities. And the reason primarily is because the current business models are not able to meet that demand. So for, let's say, a customer in tier 3 cities, for him to be able to get genuine medicines or a good diagnostic test, it's the health tech companies which are currently servicing that demand versus the asset heavy players, which are currently the incumbents in the business. I'll stop with that.
No, thank you. I think what you rightly pointed out is that tier 2, 3 cities, etc., are also ripe for disruption as patient or consumer adoption starts to increase. So moving with that thought to you, Tejasvi, when you're looking at especially the last year and a half, of course, we've all had COVID to deal with and a lot of other challenges that have come along the way. But have you seen when you're looking at perhaps not only healthcare but other spaces as well around you, a lot more adoption of digital first solutions, technologies coming out of what we of course call Bharat, but tier 2, tier 3 cities and beyond?
Absolutely, Gautam. In fact, that I was going to fully agree with what Vikram said as well, because I think this is the one area where we should absolutely look at other sectors and pick a leaf out of their books. If you look at where Flipkart is getting its revenues from, as a simple example, right, more than 60% is coming from tier 2, tier 3. And, that's the segment that's growing 40-50% every year. So we know that there is a significant market there that is willing and able and happy to pay. I think a lot of the conversations I have with startups, sometimes, they'll come in and they'll say things like, well, customers from tier 2 won't pay for services. They'll only pay for products and stuff like that. And I think a lot of that is, as Vikram rightly said, it's a little bit of biases in our mind, right? We have to think about, have we made the right product that they are willing, or right service that they're willing to pay for? I think is a question, because there's no doubt that they have every intention and they're happy to pay for value and convenience when they see that there is value to it, right? And you can see it across agri-tech startups have been doing really well. So all the way down to rural, we know that there are paying markets for services that make sense to the demographic.
I think of course, I personally resonate a lot with what both of you have said. But what is interesting is that you see there's a lot of alignment between both your thoughts. Pankaj, to you, with people in the metros, I mean, there is, of course, lack of accessibility of good quality healthcare, even in metros when you look at it. But broadly, relatively speaking, we are spoiled for choice. We have, the best of doctors, clinics, etc., for helping us manage our chronic conditions. But when you look at, of course, the tier 2 cities of India and beyond, perhaps, the ability for getting good quality access is still somewhat lacking. However, in the case, if an individual is introduced to a digital first healthcare delivery model, what is your view in terms of, the loyalty or the customer stickiness in a tier 2, tier 3 city of India, or patient stickiness to a platform versus what one would see in a metro? Because given here, there are umpty number of choices, whereas in tier 2 cities, if a person comes onto a digital first solution, gets hooked onto it, is able to see, good engagement outcomes, etc. How do you weigh the level of stickiness that a patient or a customer would have in a non-metro city versus a metro city? And
Yeah.
perhaps if you have examples from the US, those would be helpful as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, just taking a step back, we just don't have the supply it takes to solve for a bunch of challenges we have in healthcare today. You look at endocrinologists, right? Sub 1,000 or 600, 700 endocrinologists in the entire country. Most of them would be in our top 4 or 5 metros. We were evaluating a neurology concept recently. There are about 1,000 neurologists in the country, like 1,200 neurologists in the country. I think 90% of them are in the top 10 cities in India, right? So that leaves very little room for the thousands of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 cities we have today. So absolutely, I think totally resonate with Tejasvi and Vikram that even in our portfolio, about 3 of our portfolio companies are selling in large numbers. I think 70% of their sales are coming from tier 2, tier 3. We're seeing incredibly, if this conversation was happening 3 years ago, I would not be saying any of these things. Right, a lot has changed in the last 3 years. Like digital adoption has gone through the roof. COVID has made the rules of healthcare have changed after COVID. Right, like before COVID, we doctors were front and center. We still are. I think we'll continue to be. But a lot has changed. There is more willingness to consume content, consume products, or buy products, and then also consume services online. And we're seeing that in large numbers. I think the stickiness is perhaps the same or even better when it comes in tier 2, tier 3. And that might be because of choice, limitations in choice. That might be because a lot of these patients are actually, accessing care for the very first time. If it's a diabetic, probably talking to a diabetologist for the very first time on a platform. Or if they're using a remote monitoring device, they're probably using that for the very first time. So that introduces a whole lot of loyalty, right? It's also the concept of low-hanging fruit. Now, suddenly, your life has, been spent at an HbA1c of 9 or 10, you feel a certain way. You start, your energy levels, your, all of that is a certain way. Suddenly, this digital health company comes in at 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 rupee price point, is able to, solve some of these problems for you and challenges for you. I think, and get your HbA1c, significantly reduced. I think the loyalty is, there because there is lack of or limited options, limited past experience, and maybe that's what leads to more loyalty. We're also seeing, thinking about tier 2, tier 3, we're seeing 2 types of companies succeed. One are the ones that are providing some aspirational products, right? A lot of the founders are creating, aspirational, categories around skin, hair, nutrition. Suddenly they're getting a lot of traction, surprisingly, and something new for us to introspect on and learn. And the second are value-oriented services, right? Providing access when there has never been access before. I think those kind of services where, you're being conscious about price point, you're being conscious about the offering itself. So lots of interesting things happening, and I don't think, as Vikram said, technology is the only way to solve our challenges. There's nothing else. There has to be these solutions, and the future of healthcare in India is tech first, tech led.
So we do have technology to come and rescue us from this massive problem that we have. So Shwetank, Pankaj, mentioned if I posed him this question 3 years back, perhaps his answer would have been different. Let's jog your memory back, 6, 7, 8 years ago when you ran this GP model in India. Would you have, what differences would you have faced if it was in 2022? And is there a possible way that, that GP model, which perhaps was earlier than it should have, succeeded significantly now?
Great question, Gautam. I've tried to go back to 8 ideas. I mean, certainly it would have been a lot more technology first. I think companies like Loop, Loop Clinic, etc., doing a great job of building technology first primary care. The global examples, of course, are like Cano Health, Iora, etc., in the US, which have done a great job of marrying software to the physical footprint. I'm a firm believer that primary care, you do need a physical footprint to really deliver outstanding care. At some level, you need to have interface with the physical footprint. It can't be purely virtual. We're not there yet to be able to deliver. I mean, I remember one of the key things we used to talk about is the bedside manner of a doctor. And I think that still matters. You can't, and the bedside manner and the Zoom manner of a doctor are two different things. So I think, if we were doing it now, we would, it would be a lot more leaning on technology, a lot more focus on using technology to better manage your conditions. Something like what you do with your care programs, I think, is a really important part, because as a clinic, we were still reliant on people coming in, and we actually employed telecallers to remind people it's your time for your appointment. You need to come back in. But the model only worked if you charged people when they came back in. And that obviously meant a lot of fall-offs and a lot of drop-offs, especially for diabetic patients and for patients with chronic conditions. And I think technology today allows you to do that very cost effectively, so it can be free and hence improve clinical outcomes over the long term. So those would be some sort of key differences, I guess, if you were building a primary care system from scratch today. And I'm glad to see actually startups are doing it. So super excited to see them succeed.
Thank you for that, Shwetank. So I am everyone cognizant of time, and this is a Sunday morning, so I'm sure you have a tall agenda with family planned out already. So I would then perhaps want to move to asking each of you a very specific question, given what I know of you and your backgrounds, and I think the audience will greatly be delivered good insights from these questions. I hope so, at least. And we'll start off with you, Tejasvi, because many in the audience have had familiarity of dealing with healthcare systems, hospitals, hospitals, laboratories, etc. And you come with that background. What can you or help us understand how startups can actually work or partner with legacy healthcare systems up until now? And I think COVID has helped, of course, but up until now, we haven't seen too many startups, break through with large healthcare institutions or systems that we already have in place. So what is it going to take for startups to partner with these healthcare systems and be able to really make a disruptive change?
Yeah, Gautam, I think this is so interesting, right? Because I've seen this from the side of when we were sitting at Medanta and we would evaluate which startups and what kind of solutions we wanted to work with. And then now from the other side of, trying to help our portfolio companies crack some of this. And I think the biggest thing I see on both sides that is a challenge that I didn't think it would be is that they view themselves as being competitors, which is not necessarily like, in fact, it's not at all the right thing, right? Because I think the startups think, here's a legacy system. They are in solving for patient experience the way we know can be done. I'm disrupting this and I'm going to replace this current interaction. And meanwhile, there are lots of doctors and lots of hospitals sitting on the other side saying, we provide a great clinical service, and there are these kids with a tech background coming in and telling us that we have to do things differently, and I don't even know if they're solving for the patient or really demonstrating any sort of clinical credibility. Do they understand the complexity of what we do, right? And I think the most this seemed very obvious, but it bears repeating because I do see it as not yet quite there as being common knowledge, is that I view these services as being very complementary to each other. And in fact, even within our portfolio and across the startup ecosystem, I think those that have been most successful are the ones that have actually built in that way, right? Legacy systems have clearly evolved for a certain type of doctor-patient interaction, right? It's generally highly symptomatic when you decide that you want to go and seek out a doctor, and hospitals over time move to higher and higher end procedures and higher value procedures, and all of that has evolved over a particular period. And to Shwetank's point, while we say technology is super important, and it is, and it's a critical part of the solution, that's not to say that, as he said, the Zoom side manner is not the same as a bedside manner, right? And there's a lot of value to that offline face-to-face interaction with somebody who is sick and in desperate need of care as well. So I think what I've seen at least is that the best startups think about this as not replacing the doctor, but becoming a very, very good doctor's assistant to basically take away everything and let the doctor do what he does best. And if you talk to a lot of doctors, I think they're equally frustrated with saying, look, I met this patient, I gave him some advice. I don't know if he's following the advice. He's going to come back to me 3 months or 6 months later, even more sick than when I saw him, because he's not taking this seriously till he gets visibly unhealthy. And I think they see the value of startups providing that continuum of care, right? So if you can extend your services to before that doctor interaction and after that doctor interaction, in a way that, again, to doctors, I think it is important that you seem clinically credible and you seem like you're doing the right thing for the patient. And if you're able to actually plug that in, that is a system that makes a lot of sense to them, right? And I think even at Medanta, that's kind of the path that we went down, to say that what are things that we can't do or our doctors can't do because they simply don't have time, and are there startups that can help us ensure that our doctors are spending time where they should be. So it's almost like a triaging with the startup, and then the doctor is able to see the most sick patients, we're able to utilize his time more efficiently. And startups can even help us trigger interactions that otherwise wouldn't have happened, right? In terms of helping us engage with patients and making sure that they're staying healthy even outside of the hospital. I think that's very much how we view it, that there is potential for a really solid partnership, but you're starting off from a point of mistrust. So there's a trust building exercise that you need to go through before you can actually build that tight network. But I very much see the end state as everybody having a room here and a role to play. And it's about working together to get there.
No, I think that's a really valuable insight, and I think all on the organizing committee here comprising, of course, Dr. Banshi Sabu, Dr. Rakesh, Dr. Amit, and all the wonderful doctors who've actually created this platform. I think the reason behind that is to be able to close in on this trust deficit that exists between new age tech companies coming and thinking they're going to disrupt. On the other side, of course, the legacy healthcare systems, even doctors, etc. Not really knowing what is going to happen in terms of whether it's their data or anything else that might be in potential conflict. But I think this is exactly the kind of platform also that creates a healthy exchange of ideas and a bit of trust building. But all of this has been done before, in perhaps not in India, maybe in other geographies. Pankaj, so coming to you, given that you have a window to the US, and largely it's a very different healthcare system, wherein of course the physical healthcare system, whether it formed in terms of HMOs, etc., is already built out, and tech is being leveraged to be able to create some of these things that Tejasvi spoke about. My question to you, Pankaj, is what are the things that we can learn from perhaps what has transpired already in the US, and how much of that is really replicable in India, given that the reality is very different here, the ground reality of the situation is very different here. But how do you see perhaps learnings of something that is already, to quite a degree, especially in the diabetes care space that has gone through in the US? What are the learnings that we can perhaps tweak and bring to India?
Yeah, Gautam, when I first started working with digital health companies in the US, I was expecting something very different. I was expecting that, I remembered my days in India. We were seeing a patient for 3, 4, 5 minutes, and that was a reality, right? Like we were seeing 100, 200 patients, like a lot of doctors on the call today. I thought that the realities would be different in the US. Unfortunately, they weren't, right? Like a lot of the patient care is fairly consistent throughout the world, and it's the challenges that we face, supply shortages everywhere of different magnitudes. I think a lot of work has happened in diabetes, obviously using technology, using physicians, technology, and the entire ecosystem in the US. I feel what is relevant is some of the thinking around the care models itself, right? Like there's a shift towards multidisciplinary teams in diabetes. So not only your primary care doctor or your endocrinologist or your diabetologist, but also, health coaching, nutritionists, diabetes educators, behavioral health has a large role to play. Social workers have a role to play. So I think just this multidisciplinary care team, some patients need, and it needs to be really personalized to the end patient. So I think that is relevant anywhere in the world, right? It need not only be relevant to the US. Again, in India, you may not be able to. There is no, a model cannot be picked up and transported to the Indian market and expected to work. But at least the fundamentals that different people with different skill sets will contribute to the health of a diabetic patient makes sense. And second is just thinking about behavior change in the right way, right? Small incremental behavior changes lead to large impact in patients' lives. That entire mindset in managing chronic disease and that shift over the last 5 or 6 years has been really exciting. We're seeing really incredible clinical results. And finally, the technologies that we are seeing up and coming, right? Like, so the use of remote monitoring, the use of continuous glucose monitors, the use of, simple tools to track your diets, measure your diets, understand, track behavior change, etc. A lot of them can be contextualized to the Indian setting and used. Now, will every Indian diabetic use CGMs? Absolutely not, right? And that's not even the end goal, right? In the short term, but lots on the technology front can be picked up and carefully understood, studied, and contextualized to the Indian setting. Lots of differences also, right? Like for example, the entire payment layer is different. People hardly pay out of pocket. About 90-95% of diabetes management would be covered by insurance. That is not the reality in India. So obviously business models are very different for digital health companies that are scaling in the US versus the models that we see in India. Also, there are differences in how we as, Indians, the Indian race would react to different diets, to different drugs, to different, and, so just some of that research that, the race related differences in managing disease is something we sometimes overlook. Even a lot of the scales, unfortunately, we use in India are, Western scales. And being an Indian origin person in the US, I see how my care itself is, I'm not a Caucasian, and my realities are different and so some of that differences we need to be mindful of. But all in all, lots to learn. Lots of excitement because a lot of these challenges are common across the two countries, despite so much disparity in how much we spend in the US versus India. And then just some careful, approach needed, especially on the clinical side, when we just try to pick models and push them into India.
That's great, Pankaj. I think, like you rightly said, perhaps an individual spend on diabetes or chronic diseases would be more than 100x of what one spends in India, and that does, showcase in the advancement that the US has been able to do towards diabetes care and diabetes management using digital tools. And I think, carrying that forward, perhaps Shwetang, to you, because as Pankaj pointed out, the financial burden of diabetes is huge on a country like India, and you still find insurance lagging behind, especially looking at people with diabetes being finding it easy to get insured, whether this be OPD insurance or IPD insurance. And with wearing your perhaps as a insurer hat, with your vast experience within insurance and insurtech, what will it take for startups to really scale up, and help people get OPD, or startups or even existing insurance companies to be able to offer well-priced and good quality products to people with chronic conditions like diabetes?
Gautam, you keep putting me on the spot with very, very pointed questions. Look, I mean, at a high level, insurance is about pooling and managing risk. So the challenge is that as insurers at the moment, diabetic is sort of seen as an adverse risk or a suboptimal risk. And hence, you typically don't price the product, or you price the product by assuming the worst. So everything is 100% utilization, and hence the price becomes, very high, very difficult to manage. And it's true not only for diabetics, but most chronic conditions. So the opportunity really lies in what companies like Beato are able to do, which is define risk profiles differently. So well-managed diabetics risk is no different from, say, somebody who's not diabetic but has, is sort of prone to eating a bad diet, etc. So your data, it's all data-driven exercise. You need the data to be able to prove that the risk of this person who's taking good care of their disease is no different from those who are, not having that disease. And that is now true. Diabetes, a bunch of other chronic conditions can be managed very effectively. And, programs like Your Care Plan, etc., are a great way to show that the person is investing and tracking and obviously containing their disease. So I think it's just a matter, unfortunately, a bit of time to build that data set that shows all of this. And then you'll be able to price insurance products at an attractive and appropriate rate. But it will require a little bit of proving out this thesis, and that requires time, which takes time.
I know, and I do hope, and I genuinely think that day is not too far. All the things are moving in the right direction. And Dr. Sushil, we should be able to, thank you for that message, but we should be able to end relatively on time. And so, just scaling down the level of seriousness of this discussion, my next question to Vikram, sorry, is Vikram, you were a doctor, and then you transitioned into becoming a venture capitalist, right? How has that journey been? And perhaps, people in the audience, especially the doctors, might want to make a career switch as well, perhaps get motivated by you, inspired by you, and become a VC one day. Help us understand, how has it been and you Leapfrog, you're at now, you were part of the VC industry before too. Help us understand how this transition has been, and what you as a doctor for you has changed in looking at problems to solve for once now you're on the other side. And maybe as part of that answer, Vikram, because many in the audience may still not understand what are the various stages of VCs, if you can give us perhaps the ABC of the VC private equity industry as well.
Sure. So I see my role as Narad Muni. So I can be across both worlds, the healthcare world and the venture capital world. My friends are there on both sides. I can interact with them freely. And I think it's been a great journey so far. I didn't even know the word venture capital or private equity when I first entered MBA way back in 2008. But it's been a great journey. You get to meet a lot of very motivated, intelligent, smart people coming up with new ideas, new business models, which keeps you excited as well. So it has been a great journey so far. And sometimes as physicians, we get too deep into a subject to see the overall picture. I think having that MBA background and that diversity pool within the batch itself at an MBA college helps you understand better about the system itself rather than just go deep into a subject. Now, I think we did cover a lot of the stages of investments, but maybe just for a recap for the audience, typically there would be 4 to 5 stages of fundraising for any venture or company. Typically, the first stage is a seed stage where someone like Shwetank comes in. You might just even have an idea at that point of time, or a simple PowerPoint based on which these people would put in investments. Typically, what they would look at is the credibility of the team, the total addressable market, some of these factors. Typically, from a seed, you get into venture capital, where someone like Pankaj would typically come into. The round size typically get larger. Tejasvi and I are early growth investors who come in after the time and the unit economics have been solved for. We help grow these companies, understand the customer insights, and then typically would exit to a late stage growth investor, some of these large buyout funds which are there in the market as well. And the last stage for a company would be to go public, which some of the e-commerce companies in India now have demonstrated, and hopefully we'll see some on the healthcare tech side soon as well.
Great. Thank you so much for that very crisp crash course on the VC industry, Dr. Vikram. And I think we've run out of time already, but absolutely fantastic and engaging discussion with all of you. And I must thank each of you to be sparing the time on the Sunday morning. And also the DTechCon team for being able to create this platform, bring all of us together, and I'm sure it's only start of good things to come. So with that, thank you very much, all of you. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, Gautam.
Thank you, Gautam.